Hey, welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, March 23rd, 2025, and thank you for joining me while I talk to myself about the projected starting offense for your defending national champion, Ohio State Buckeyes, in 2025. Now, the Buckeyes are one full week into spring practices, and Ohio State fans are getting acquainted with a lot of new faces. Incoming freshman quarterback Tavian St. Clair, cornerback Devin Sanchez, wide receiver Quincy Porter, safety Fahim Delane, linebacker Riley Pettijohn, and running back Bo Jackson. Now, they headline a very talented 2025 class. That group is already enrolled and participating in spring drills. And I actually heard Jeremy Birmingham say last week that he was told by someone within the program that Sanchez, Porter, Delane, Pettijohn, and Jackson are all expected to play this season. So keep your eye on those players. Ohio State fans are also getting a first look at a very interesting group of high-impact transfers, starting with offensive tackles Ethan Onyanwa from Rice and Phillip Daniels from Minnesota. Tight end Max Clare from Purdue is another one. Running back C.J. Donaldson from West Virginia, another high-impact transfer to keep your eye on. And defensive end Logan George from Idaho State. Finally, linebacker Ty Howard from Duquesne is another name to watch. Now, we'll get into it here momentarily, but Onyanwa, Daniels, and Clare are all expected to start. And Donaldson, if he doesn't start, will play significantly at running back for the Buckeyes this season. Finally, as we discussed last month, Ohio State has a new quarterback coach in Billy Fessler and a new offensive line coach in Tyler Bowen. And as has already been very well documented, Brian Hartline is the new offensive play caller, replacing Chip Kelly. So lots of new names, lots of new faces playing key roles for this offense in 2025. So in our last pod, I spent 20 minutes talking about the projected starting defense and its prospects in 2025. Today, I want to do the same for the starting offense. But first, I think it's important that we take stock of what Ryan Day and Brian Hartline are going to have to replace from last season's offense, which finished third nationally in offensive yards per play and 12th in scoring offense. It starts with the loss of quarterback Will Howard. He's the first big loss we have to account for. Howard finished second nationally in completion percentage at 73%. He threw for 4,010 yards and 35 touchdowns. Howard's gone. He's off to the NFL. Receiver Emeka Egbuka, who caught 81 passes for 1,011 yards and 10 touchdowns, is also off to the NFL. Running backs Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, who combined for 2,076 yards rushing and 24 rushing touchdowns, are also gone. Tight end G. Scott Jr., who caught 27 balls for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns, is also gone. Donovan Jackson, who in my estimation saved Ohio State's 2024 season with his successful transition from left guard to left tackle, has also moved on. Finally, starting right tackle Josh Fryer, who actually led all Ohio State offensive players in snaps last season with 928, is also gone. So if you're keeping score at home, that's a starting quarterback who threw for over 4,000 yards, a 1,000-yard receiver, 2 1,000-yard running backs, both starting tackles, and a starting tight end, all gone. And when you think about it that way, replacing that much production and experience looks extremely daunting. Not a lot of programs can lose that much production and experience and be expected to compete for a national championship, but such is life in Columbus. The expectations never change. They're always through the roof, as we know. And look, I think there's good reason to be bullish on the 2025 offense, despite all of those losses, because the Buckeyes will still be returning a lot of talent and experience at some key positions. And I mentioned them earlier. They bolstered the roster with some high-impact transfers who will fill the voids left by several of last year's starters. I also think there's good reason to trust the track record of this coaching staff when it comes to having the next man up ready to play at a high level. Ryan Day's record with first-year starters at quarterback is impeccable, and the assembly line of elite receivers under Brian Hartline over the last 8 years has been just stupefying. And that's a big reason why I think Ohio State is the betting favorite to repeat as national champs in 2025. According to FanDuel, Ohio State is plus 600, just ahead of Texas to win the national title. All right, so let's jump right into it. I want to start, of course, with quarterback, the most important position on the field. Now, we're going to be led to believe there's going to be a competition at that position between sophomore Julian Sayin, junior Lincoln Kienholz, and incoming freshman Tavian St. Clair. They are the only three scholarship quarterbacks in the program at the moment. But I'm going to spare you the suspense. Julian Sayin is going to emerge from the competition as the starter, though I don't think Lincoln Kienholz is necessarily a straw man in this competition. I think Kienholz will make Sayin earn the job. But look, Sayin already beat Kienholz out to be QB3 last season, and I think he just has the pedigree to be the next man up at quarterback for this program. Sayin was the third-ranked quarterback in the 2024 class, the number 20 overall player according to 24/7 Sports. Now, Rivals had Sayin rated a little higher. He was the number 2 rated quarterback and number 4 overall player in 2024 according to Rivals. Sayin was the 2023 Gatorade Player of the Year and the MVP of the Elite 11 Finals. He also had offers from Georgia, LSU, and Notre Dame. Now, as we remember, he came to Ohio State by way of Alabama, where he was enrolled for a couple of weeks, but last year before transferring after Nick Saban retired. Sayin appeared in 4 games last season, playing only 27 snaps. He only attempted 12 passes for 84 yards and a touchdown. So he's still very green. Let's be clear about that. He's also not the biggest dude in stature, right? Sayin's right around 6'1", just over 200 pounds. Now it looks like he's put on a little weight since the season ended, but he's going to be a very different kind of quarterback compared to Will Howard, who's, he's 3 inches taller, 35 pounds heavier, and came to Columbus with almost 1,800 snaps under his belt. The Julian Sayin experience this season is going to be very different. And it stands to reason there's going to be some growing pains along the way, as well as Sayin settles in as the starter. I mentioned it earlier. What gives me a lot of comfort with the quarterback situation this season, though, is Ryan Day's track record with first-year starters since he's been in Columbus. Now, when Day was offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach in 2018, Dwayne Haskins shattered most of the school's single-season passing records as a first-year starter. Haskins threw for 4,831 yards and 50 touchdown passes, and the Buckeyes went 13-1 and finished as Big Ten champs that season. In 2019, Day's first year as head coach, Justin Fields threw for 3,273 yards and 41 touchdowns as a first-year starter, and the Buckeyes repeated as Big Ten champs that season. They also qualified for the college football playoff. In 2021, C.J. Stroud, also a first-year starter, threw for 4,435 yards and 45 touchdown passes. Stroud led the Buckeyes to a very successful season. Ohio State went into the Michigan game ranked number 2 in the college football playoff rankings. Before losing that game to Michigan, they went on to win the Rose Bowl. It's also worth noting Haskins in 2018, Fields in 2019, and Stroud in 2021 all went to New York as Heisman finalists. So not too shabby as first-year starters under Ryan Day, those 3 players. Now, the only first-year starting quarterback that Ryan Day had in Columbus that wasn't considered an outright success was probably Kyle McCord in 2023. But McCord still finished second in the Big Ten in passing with 3,170 yards and 24 touchdown passes that season. And look, that was a transitional year for the offensive line. McCord did not have the protection from his offensive line that Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, and C.J. Stroud did as first-year starters. And 2023 was an injury-shortened season for 2 of McCord's most valuable weapons, Emeka Egbuka and Travion Henderson, and yet he still managed to throw for over 3,000 yards that season. So, again, there's good reason to trust Ryan Day's track record with respect to Julian Sayin this season, 2025. Sayin certainly has the recruiting profile required to be a successful quarterback under Ryan Day, and he's going to have plenty of weapons around him to be successful, and we'll get into those momentarily. Now, I said this on our last pod. I am bullish on the Ohio State offensive line, especially the interior, where they're going to be returning a quartet that played a lot of high-leverage snaps last season. Tegra Shabola played 774 snaps at right guard last season. He's back. And during the playoffs, Shabola rotated at that position with Austin Sareveld, who played 495 snaps. Sareveld returns. He's also been repping at tackle this spring. Carson Hinsman, another name to remember here. He took over as the starting center when Seth McLaughlin blew out his Achilles in November. Hinsman played 597 snaps last season. Hinsman, we think, will start at center in 2025. He can also play guard. Finally, junior Luke Montgomery, who started at left guard in the CFP semis against Texas and in the national title game against Notre Dame, is also back. I think between Shabola, Sareveld, Hinsman, and Montgomery, Tyler Bowen has four very capable interior offensive linemen that have played a lot of high leverage snaps, for a national championship team last season. So I really trust that quartet. I mean, I think Hinsman is your starter at center. By the way, the coaching staff is also very high on sophomore Josh Padilla, who could also be a factor at center this season. But I think Hinsman at this stage is entrenched as the starter there. Remember, he also started 12 games at center in 2023 as well. I think Luke Montgomery is your starting left guard. And then I think that leaves Shabola and Sareveld to compete for the starting job at right guard, though Bowen may decide to continue the rotation of Shabola and Sareveld at that position. That's what Justin Fry had going in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens there. At the very least, I think you have three interior starters locked in with a fourth experienced player, whether that's going to be Shabola or Sareveld, who can provide quality depth. And then you have a young guy in Josh Padilla who'll be ready to contribute this season. So I feel really good about the interior of the offensive line in 2025. Now, the situation at tackle is less certain. There isn't as much depth and returning experience there. Ohio State had to turn to the transfer portal to fill the voids left by Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer. Ohio State added Rice transfer Ethan Onianwa, who at 6'6", 357 pounds is a mountain of a man. Onianwa was a 3-year starter for the Owls. He started at left tackle last season and at right tackle in 2023 and 2022. In 548 snaps at left tackle last season, Onianwa only allowed 1 sack and 9 quarterback pressures. He was considered one of the top tackles available in the transfer portal. He is one of the new additions to this roster I'm really looking forward to watching. And with 2,249 snaps at the FBS level under his belt, I'd be stunned if Onianwa isn't the day one starter at left tackle. And I think Minnesota transfer Philip Daniels is likely in line to start at right tackle. Sophomore Ian Moore is in play at this position as well. Moore is a player the coaching staff is said to be very high on as well. But I think Daniels is probably the starter here. Now, as a freshman at Minnesota, Daniels played 300 snaps at right tackle last season. Now, he was a reserve for the first 2 months of 2024, but then ended up starting the last 4 games of the season for the Gophers. At 6'5", 315 pounds, Daniels is a Cincinnati native. Now, he's going to have 3 years of eligibility remaining. Seems like a prospect with a lot of upside, and I think he's the starter at right tackle, as I said. Personally, I think the offensive line has Joe Moore Award potential this season with a very strong group of interior linemen, a beast at left tackle in Onianwa, and a young player, again, with a lot of upside at right tackle in Daniels. And you have a redshirt sophomore in Josh Padilla and a true sophomore in Ian Moore, who both appear to be ready to contribute this season. There's a decent chance this group could be better than the offensive line that finished the 2024 season. I don't think that's hyperbole. I know that's a bold statement, but I really believe this year's group has that potential. Now, after quarterback, I think the most intriguing competition on offense will be at running back, and there are 3 names to watch here. Sophomore James Peoples, senior C.J. Donaldson, he's the West Virginia transfer, and incoming freshman Bo Jackson. Now, Jackson's already turning heads 1 week into spring practices. As I said earlier, Jeremy Birmingham was told by one of his contacts within the program that Jackson is a player the coaching staff is already very high on. Now, with young players like Peoples and Jackson, the question will always be, can they hold up in pass protection? And if there are major questions in that area for either of those backs, then maybe Carlos Loughlin turns to the veteran with over 1,100 career snaps, and that's C.J. Donaldson as his starter. Donaldson has over 2,000 career rushing yards and 30 rushing touchdowns. He's a big back, a total bruiser at 6'2" in the 240 range. Though Donaldson told reporters this week he's already dropped 18 pounds since arriving in Columbus. I think Donaldson's going to play a major role in this offense, to be sure. He'll be their short yardage back for sure. He's going to get a lot of other carries. There's no doubt about it. But I expect James Peoples to be the lead back in 2025. At 5'10", 203 pounds from San Antonio, Texas, Peoples was the number 126 overall prospect in the 2024 class, according to 24/7 Sports. He draws a lot of comparisons to former Buckeye J.K. Dobbins, who was also a Texas native, by the way. Peoples played 94 snaps behind Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins last season. He finished 2024 with 197 yards rushing on 49 carries and 2 touchdowns. Sophomore Sam Williams-Dixon could also be a factor in the running back rotation as well. But if the early reports are correct, I think Williams-Dixon is going to have a tough time holding off the freshman Bo Jackson for carries. Barring injuries, I think Peoples and Donaldson are the 1-2 punch in the running game for the 2025 offense, with probably a sprinkling of Bo Jackson as the third back. It's going to be a very interesting room, a very interesting competition. I don't think it would be fair to compare them to Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Probably not going to be as good as those two backs, but I think they'll be plenty good enough. Now, there should be a very healthy competition for playing time at tight end, with Purdue transfer Max Clare, Will Kazmarek, and Jelani Thurman. Now, Clare is far and away the most dynamic playmaker of this group. He caught 51 passes for 685 yards and 4 touchdowns for the Boilermakers last season. But I think Kazmarek and Thurman are the much better run-blocking tight ends. If you look at their run-blocking grades last year, Clare finished with a run-blocking grade of 53.8, which is, not so good, while Thurman and Kazmarek finished with run-blocking grades of 77.8 and 68.8, respectively, much, much better. Now, Clare, with his versatility, can also operate as a receiver out of the slot. Actually, Brandon Inniss might stand to lose more snaps to Clare than Kazmarek and Thurman. This is one of the better tight end rooms I think Ohio State has had in recent memory. And I think Keenan Bailey is going to need to play all of these kids, assuming, of course, he doesn't lose any of them to the transfer portal after spring ball. I'm very much looking forward to watching what Max Clare brings to a passing game that already features the most talented receiver room in the country. So a really good group of tight ends, I think, headlined by Clare. And finally, that brings me to the most dynamic element of the 2025 offense, and that is, of course, the receivers, headlined by sophomore phenom Jeremiah Smith, the man-child. There are virtually no questions about who the starters are going to be there, and of course it all begins with Smith, who was a first-team AP All-American as a true freshman last season. Now, Smith led the Buckeyes with 1,315 yards receiving on 76 catches and 16 total touchdowns. According to FanDuel, Smith right now is plus 1,200 to win the Heisman Trophy behind 3 quarterbacks, LSU's Garrett Nussmeier, Texas's Arch Manning, and Clemson's Cade Klubnik. Carnell Tate, who caught 52 passes for 733 yards and 4 touchdowns, is also locked in as a starter for the second year in a row. Smith and Tate will give Ohio State the best receiver duo in America. Finally, I think Brandon Inniss will be the man to fill the huge void left by Emeka Egbuka at the slot. Inniss played 195 snaps in a reserve role last season. He also returned punts. Inniss finished 2024 with 176 yards on 14 catches, but he made the most of his limited opportunities. Inniss had a huge touchdown catch in a road victory over number 3 Penn State. He also had a 19-yard catch to convert a big third down in the national championship game. I think Inniss has all the tools to be the next great slot receiver for the Buckeyes. I can't wait to see what he's going to do with starter-level snaps this season. Also, keep your eye out. He changed numbers. He's now wearing number 1. Brandon Inniss is. Now, 3 other names to watch who could play valuable reserve roles for Brian Hartline this season. Junior Bryson Rogers, who played 162 snaps last season. Sophomore Mylan Graham, who's been turning heads in spring practices so far this season. He's drawing comparisons to Garrett Wilson. He also wears the same number 5. Finally, and I mentioned him earlier, the 5-star freshman Quincy Porter is another name to watch as a player that could potentially break through as a reserve in the receiver room for the Buckeyes this season. It's a good bet, I think, that one of those 3 will play a big role as a reserve for this Ohio State offense. So I know Ryan Day will have a first-time play caller in Brian Hartline and a first-year starter at quarterback in Julian Sayin. And I know this is going to sound like a bold statement, but I'm going to plant my flag right here, right now on March 23rd. I think the Buckeyes are going to have the best offense in the Big Ten, and I think it will be among the top 3 or 4 offenses in the country in 2025. Ohio State has the best receiver room in America. I think they will be as good, if not better, on the offensive line than they were at the end of last season when they won a national championship. They won't be as good as Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins at running back, but I think they'll be plenty good enough at that position this season. And there is good reason to trust Ryan Day's track record with first-year quarterbacks. I think he and Billy Fessler will have Julian Sand ready to go by the season opener against Texas. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Check your feeds for another pod from us probably sometime after the spring showcase on April 12th. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.